Welcome, everyone. I'm going to do a quick check and ask, am I too close to the microphone? Am I aggressively hurting your ears in the front row? Okay, that's good. My name is Misha. I'm from the National Right to Housing Network, and I'm really excited to be able to introduce a really great group of presenters today. I'm going to start today's session by acknowledging that we're in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. We also acknowledge that people of African descent have been in Nova Scotia for over 400 years, and we honor and offer gratitude to those ancestors of African descent who came before us to this land. This acknowledgement is an understanding of the ongoing and deep-seated impacts of colonization, a recognition that it's not merely history, but a living legacy that continues to affect Indigenous communities across the country. It's a call to recognize and confront these realities as part of the history that we share, to see them not as these distant echoes, but as present challenges that we need to address together. When we talk about housing as a human right, we're talking about a right that is intrinsically linked to dignity and community, and it can't be separated from the rights of Indigenous people who have lived on and cared for these lands. I encourage you to hold space for the discomfort that comes from this acknowledgement and recognize it as a necessary step towards learning and growth. I also invite you to reflect on your connection to land, the relationships that stem from that connection, and how those interconnections shape your commitments to calls to action and calls for justice for and alongside Indigenous people. Today's session, just to make sure we're all in the right room, which you definitely are, this is going to be such a good session. This is going to be a really good one. It's going to be on preventing evictions. We're going to be speaking to rent banks, activism, and access to justice, the big three. So just a little description for today. A key part of addressing and ending homelessness involves preventing evictions. Access to justice mechanisms can be a powerful human rights-based tool to prevent evictions, but it's only when they're equally accessible to all people. Legal aid and financial assistance can make a huge difference in whether or not a tenant can make a claim or defend their housing in tenancy hearings. Meanwhile, tenant unions and rent banks offer other important avenues for supporting tenants, building community power, and preventing evictions. So today's session will explore different avenues for preventing evictions, and we'll leave you all here today with a better understanding of tools that you can use to improve your security of tenure in your own communities. And to also prevent harmful evictions and flow into homelessness. I want to give a very warm welcome to our presenters today. Michelle Long and David Campbell will be presenting from the University of Calgary on the perceived barriers and facilitators towards a real-time data sharing system. Joan Frame, Lyndon George, Brendan Drouat, David Pearson, Dev Elms, all of who are probably out here, I assume, because that's a lot of people and not enough up here. So I'm going to make an assumption that you are here today. I've seen some of you here. You're from Mary Street Tenants Association, and we'll be presenting on action to activism, how to form a community and make positive change. And then lastly, we'll be hearing from Tobin LeBlanc-Haley from the University of New Brunswick, St. John, Melissa Gills from Van City Community Foundation, and Cheryl Crosswitz from did I mess it up? No. Oh, I was so close. Okay. Okay, thank you. We'll be presenting on rent banks in Canada, so some of the promising practices for homelessness prevention. We're going to start with Michelle, if you want to come up and speak to your presentation.
Come on, yeah. Michelle.
So before I start, how's my volume? Louder? Closer? Okay. Wow, I'm really touching the microphone. Before I start, I want to make a shameless plug for a film that we are showing today at 5:15 p.m. in ballroom level, room 501, 502. It's in the middle of your program packet, and it's about people who are living with diabetes and homelessness. It's going to be a really great time, so I encourage you at 5:15 p.m., if you're not doing anything, come check it out. And moving on to my talk today, I need to preface this that has nothing to do with evictions, but what you will learn is some current data sharing landscape in this sector. So this is the outline I will follow. And we're going to be talking a lot about client data today, so I want to talk about what is client data. So this typically includes demographics such as your age, your gender, and your family history. You might also see housing history and some of the information about what service providers you're currently connected with. You may also see information such as triage tool overall score, so that includes the SPDAT or the VAT, and oftentimes this includes case management notes if that is included in there as well. So client data is regularly collected, but why do we want real-time data sharing? People with lived experiences of homelessness are often connected with several service providers, and individuals may be giving different pieces of information to different providers. So think about the analogy of different puzzle pieces. But with rapid advancements in the homeless management information systems, real-time data sharing is possible and already happening. And that is through the release of HIFIS 4.0 through the Government of Canada. Now, real-time data sharing would closely align with the goals of coordinated access, which, as many of you already know, is a way of streamlining and standardizing access to housing and support services. And one of these things that you might often hear is a by names list. And that is a form of real-time data sharing, but what we're interested in goes a little bit beyond a by names list and includes sharing some of the client data that I mentioned earlier in this real-time data sharing system. Now, when you are sharing client data in this one shared environment from multiple service providers, people are able to more likely see the complete picture. In this case, maybe you see a finished puzzle rather than the separate puzzle pieces. So some of the questions we were interested in going into this research project is, what is this like across Canada right now? And what are the perceived barriers and facilitators towards real-time data sharing? So we interviewed 25 people across 18 urban designated community entities from December of last year up until April. And we chose to interview urban designated community entities because we theorize that in a larger environment, you're more likely to need to do coordination between multiple organizations and would see increased benefit from a real-time data sharing system. And we recruited these individuals by looking at the Infrastructure Canada's Reaching Home website, and they list contact information for each of the community entities. And as you can see here, we were able to interview people across the provincial regions with the big exception of Quebec. And it wasn't for a lack of trying. Unfortunately, some of the ways how their contact information was listed, we couldn't find a specific organization or individual to interview people in Quebec. Now, some of the people that we did interview included held roles such as executive directors, managers, program and data analysts, and coordinated access leads, and they were in their positions from less than 3 months to over 10 years. So quite a variety of breadth and perspective we were able to get in these interviews. Now, of the 18 designated community entities, or DCEs, that we interviewed, there was quite the large range in how data sharing was looking in their community, ranging from currently no real-time data is being shared up to some client data is being shared real-time across the different organizations in their geographical area. And within these 10, majority of them are actively sharing data like demographics, housing history, and services access. But case management notes are typically not shared widely and are kept in the organizations that are providing the supports. And if they are sharing data or planning to share data, they are using HIFIS 4.0 to do that. Now, in theory, real-time data sharing systems are great because you tend to get increased coordination and better utilization of resources. In this quote here, essentially, with this real-time data sharing, you're able to prevent duplicated bookings of shelter beds, and that ensures that they're able to maximize the help they're able to provide in the resources that are currently available. However, in reality, there are some practical aspects to consider. One of them is, if your current system is already working well, why do you want to change it? Because some organizations, they use their own custom-built HMIS systems, or they significantly modify ones to meet their own organizational needs. So when you are asking someone to change over to a new system, it often creates a lot of extra work for service providers, and they may end up having to enter the same information in two different places, which is not good for anyone. You also need to consider client privacy, because when you are in this large data environment with a lot of people inputting information, a lot of people seeing information, there's always an increased risk of a data breach or people looking at information they're not supposed to. And then, again, because everyone's in this one environment, we need to place extra caution on certain populations, including individuals who are leaving domestic abuse situations. There are also these ethical considerations of when should you stop data sharing, because it can easily start including law enforcement if you're not careful. So there are a lot of things that you need to think about before embarking on a real-time data sharing system. But if your community is committed to implementing a system like this, this is a very simplified blueprint on how you might want to consider doing that. First and foremost, you want a team or organization that has the appropriate internal structure. So what I mean by that is you should consider having privacy and legal teams that can draft policies and consent forms. You should also have technological support, people who are able to manage databases, and ultimately the goal is to have long-term and sustained funding, because a scope like this, it's only going to get bigger and more complicated, so you need to be able to plan advance and have the money to support the increasing IT costs. Now that if we have that figured out, you might want to ensure that you're thinking of how should we protect client privacy. And you might want to do that considering like setting up your system in such a way there's visibility filters. What I mean by that is, for example, if you are a service provider that is only working in a shelter that serve adult males, you should not be able to see client data who are listed as female or youth in the system, and that's one way to protect client privacy. And related to having the appropriate internal structure is you need to have really strong data policies and staff hiring policies to ensure that everyone is on the same page about what it means to be stewards of this data and how to keep everyone's information confidential. And perhaps listing some repercussions about what happens if you do access this information inappropriately, to really highlight this strong data culture. And that comes down to how you hire staff and what you do when you start training them as well. Now, the next step is you need to engage the organizations within your geographical area very early on to create the interest to want to be part of this real-time data sharing system. And these individuals who might be able to do that, we call them data sharing champions. And these are individuals who are essentially pounding the pavement, being able to talk to these organizations and engage in what are their concerns and how can a real-time data sharing system help address some of their concerns. So for example, if organizations really want to push for change in, say, in this area, we can say we can collect really good data and push for that change using the data that we're collecting in this shared data environment with all these other organizations as well, because politicians love numbers. So let's give them good numbers. But even if you're able to get to this step, we may encounter roadblocks. And some of that might include some of the siloed funding models, because there are some great organizations doing work where homeless serving area is just one portion of what they do. But this real-time data sharing system is right now only including the homeless serving sector. But what do they do about all the other types of support that they provide? Are we asking them to implement a different system for each area of social services they're able to provide? It's not feasible, so this is one thing that we need to consider, maybe more holistic funding models that can allow them to use a real-time data sharing system more effectively. Again, ethical considerations is coming up about how long should you be storing client data for, and who would be responsible for storing this data and maintaining the security on it. Then there's also technological limitations where different organizations have different information needs. So if every organization has to collect different data points, how do we put that all together into a one system that works well for everyone? But let's say we're able to overcome those roadblocks and we can show what the data can do. We need to continuously engage with organizations to refine the process. So this becomes a very cyclical loop about engaging organizations and creating more buy-in, and then eventually having everyone part of this shared data environment. But again, in situations such as this, the need for informed consent is really important. And some of the ways that we can make the client feel more safe with this consent process would be creating more client-friendly language consent. So that might include just modifying your consent itself or including an attachment that makes things easier to understand, because there's a lot of legal jargon packed into maybe a double-sided piece of paper that I don't understand. How can I expect anyone else to understand it too? And then allowing the flexibility for written and verbal consent. So sometimes in this informed consent process, it might be really beneficial to have a conversation with the client, time permitting, about what does this mean for you, and do you understand what we're asking you to agree to? But it's always great if you can provide an option for clients not to share their data, but the flexibility to change their mind afterwards. And yeah, the fourth point is, if you're going to be in this real-time shared data environment, you should be storing your consent forms electronically rather than in paper form, because you don't want to go to each organization trying to find the client's consent form. And then lastly, consent is usually a living document. It's important to review it periodically and make updates to it if you need to. Now, a huge benefit of a single data sharing system is you get more uniform collection of data points, but it doesn't guarantee that the data is high quality. Some of the factors that affect data quality include low data coverage. So what I mean by that is not all organizations within a geographical area are usually on this shared data system. So that means you're still getting that patchwork of client data. Or if organizations are part of this shared data environment, they're not entering information in consistently, which in the end also impacts the type of data that you're getting out. it's this analogy of garbage in, garbage out. So if you're not putting in good quality data, it's going to be really hard to get a good report and push for change that way. And some of the other factors would be organizational capacity. There's usually constant staff turnover, which makes it really difficult to train staff, and the limited time available would be spent supporting clients, not spent in the computer room trying to enter all this information in as well. And sometimes clients may use different names, and that leads to multiple files being created in the same system. So that is some things that we need to consider if we're using a real-time shared data system. But some of the things that are working well is continuous engagement. So asking the organizations what's working well, what's not working well, and how can we change things to make it better for you. And that incentivizes people to want to enter more data into their system as well. And then you should consider using standardized online training modules and one-pager instructions, so everybody is getting the same information of how and where to enter the data. And in a system this size, you should always have someone on the back end cleaning data. So what that means is if someone is looking at this database and notice something weird, they can go back to the service providers to do some periodic updates to client data if need be. And lastly, we heard super users a lot, and they're essentially champions for data integrity. And if you have them at your organization, they can also provide more training and hands-on support about entering data as well. So real-time data sharing may be a part of the largest solution to end chronic homelessness. And if real-time data sharing is something that you're interested in or considering, you should always have these 4 points in mind. Is you need to have appropriate precautions for client privacy in mind, ensure that clients are always informed through the consent process and they're continually reviewed. You're always working with the organization to see how we can make things better or create buy-in. And this links really well to the last point of you want everyone to be part of this shared data system. So how can we get more interested parties in there? And I really want to thank Pam and Rubob, who's not here today, but they helped me with the interviews and the analysis and the Campbell Lab as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Data is a huge conversation right now, how to access data, what data gaps are be missing right now, and I think this has been really informative. Michelle, thank you so much for sharing it with us today. I think it'll really be helpful, I think, even when it comes to research and how to practice ethical research and how to just capture data, because then the question right now has really been who continues to be captured and then who continuously gets left behind. So thank you for sharing that with us today. I'm going to switch over to the next presenters from Mary Street Tenant Association. If you wanted to come up, I'm going to work on getting your PowerPoint slide ready. Let's see if I got the right one. Nope, this is not it.
So I wonder if we might ask our good friends and allies up here if there might be a possibility of providing and making some space, because this space is really small here. And we certainly want to make room for the lived experience of our relatives here. And then we'll get off stage and give you your space back. Yeah, they'll need microphones. You can stay down there.
I can stay down there.
We'll get you a microphone.
Okay.
This one.
No, he says, let's stay down here. He's going to get me a mic.
What was your PowerPoint slide called? Was it this one? Halifax PowerPoint guys? Which one was your PowerPoint slide? Was this one? Right?
Yes, that one.
I can draw pictures.
I'm and then you just,
Do we have a microphone for her?
oh, yes, we can. Oh, thank you,
Oh,
sir.
here we go. Perfect.
Thank you so much, I appreciate that.
First off, I want to say bonjour, Anishinaabe, Wakagiji, Miigwech, Indigenous Cause. My name is Longfeather. I come from the Chippewas, Kettle, and Stony Point First Nation in Ontario. I'm family member to Dudley George of the Upper Wash Crisis. Anishinaabe is the nation that I come from. Ojokwe is one of the many terms that we have within our languages that help describe my gender and gender identity. As Indigenous people, we have our ways of life and our way of being, and we do things in a certain specific way. And I'm not willing to compromise who I am as an Indigenous person for the sake of colonial time, so I'm probably the worst person now you could have asked to be up here to speak at this moment in time, because we have protocols. We have a way that we have to do things. And so having said that, I'd like to ask our elder to come up here, please.
Well, I'm Lyndon. Gwe, medal volotio. Well, dazi bejidayo kiskuk. Ak eda wacht mij pugol kakelu koi gizadno. Kedu waltud me somulno. Ak kedu bi panim ka gizu kiziabol muksino. My name is Patsy Paul Martin, and I am the granddaughter of the Grand Chief Gabriel Sillyboy, who is with a large family, my mother's father, and my grandfather was a hunter, a trapper, and a grand chief. And back in 1929, he got arrested for hunting muskrat. And at the time, there was a language barrier. And the agents at that time and the people that in power arrested him. But he knew what the treaties were. And he cited the 1752 treaty, all the treaties that would provide hunting and fishing and trapping rights. But no, they arrested him. He spent the night in jail, and he felt that he failed his people. 50 years later went by, and a young member of parliament by the name of Jaime Baptiste, he granted pardon. And in the province of Nova Scotia, his remaining family of 34 grandchildren came to the government house, and he was granted pardon. And only to find that it was very sad, because he went down and died thinking that he failed his Mi'kmaq family. So I'm very proud to talk about that little bit of history. And it's now embedded at the government house, which is awesome. But I want to welcome each and every one of you to Mi'kma'ki, the 7 districts, the Atlantic provinces of Nova Scotia. And we are staunch Mi'kmaq people. And I am very privileged to come from that linkage. I speak, read, and write my Mi'kmaq language. And I want to say a prayer, and if you just want to bend your, fold your head, fold your hands and bend your, I want to say a prayer, and I will translate it in Mi'kmaq as soon as I am done. O gizuk, mega dual dasi begis liagler telel. Gedung mui wal ne tej geluk na we ginumin. Also meso ne wa mi majwinu tan tej gid na ma dijla we gul tej telel jibuktuk. Igin mudang mokelo kauti majuk kodemano. A pantaru la sidwakan wal a abogon mo gizuguk. Tanu dajiga bogon masudi. Abogon mo squijinuk. Dan ole jultijik awanda swalojik akid na ma dijik a nuda abogon masudi. Only squalling mo salsidik tuk. Mega de gizuk kolalik. Naiwa you outig ni munen geluk chit gizuk sabonok akal miganik. Translation. I asked the Creator for many different things. To invite our ancestors, our Mi'kmaq ancestors, and your ancestors to come with us in their spiritual guidance. I ask the Creator to bless all the people that went on their spiritual journey and not to turn back and take anybody with them. I ask the Creator to bless all the elders, Indigenous, non-Indigenous elders that are struggling with everything, this climate change, this powerlessness, this lonesomeness, everything that is weighing them down. I ask the Creator to send the appropriate helps to help them. I ask the Creator to help the struggling families trying to put food on the table, find jobs, take care of their grown children, take care of their little children. I ask the Creator to continue to help support and guide them. I ask the Creator for very many, many things. And one of the things that we need to concentrate is the people, that every person matters. I ask the Creator to provide continued supports, guidance, wrap them in love. I ask the Creator to think about the people that are underprivileged, underserved, dispossessed, displaced, that are lonely, that are hungry, that have no place to work, no place to live. I ask the Creator to send appropriate people to help with their journey, their struggles. I ask the Creator to continue helping the grieving families that have lost men, women, and children that are murdered and missing. I ask the Creator to think about all the children that are found underneath the different graves all across Canada and the United States, everywhere. I ask the Creator to find peace for all the wars that are happening, to put a stop to that, to end them, that people come to their senses, people in power to come to their senses and to stop this. I ask the Creator for all the animals that fly, walk, and swim. I ask the Creator to provide shelter for them as well because of this climate change. And I ask the Creator for all the people in power to come down to our level of the grassroots people, to open their eyes, their ears, and nothing but good things to help, support, and assist us. We need those people in power to make good, sound decisions. We need them to help us. This conference today, I hope we move hearts and minds. I hope that the Creator will set them on a good journey so that we will take care of our people that are homeless, that are jobless, that are hungry, that are having a difficult time. And I can't help but think of the people outside living in the tents around us, and that we are here so privileged that we can drink and eat and in a warm building. I ask the Creator to help guide us so that we can do a lot of action to help our people. Sid Nogmach, so be it. Well, all in Linden.
Jimmy Gwetz for those kind words. I do want to draw attention to that it's not the St. Mary's Tenants Association, it's the Indigenous Tenant Circle. And I'm actually not, my role in what we're about to witness here was a minimal role that I played in the establishment of this particular movement in the city of Hamilton. And so today, this is a story that we're going to witness of how being empowered and how given resources and making space and listening to voices and seeing people where they're at rather than where we want them to be can make a huge difference in how we move forward together.
That way I can hold somebody's hand. She can hold my back. Can people hear me? Okay. I'm Dave. I'm Mississauga of the Credit First Nation. I thought I should also include I'm a father, a grandfather, and now a great-grandfather. I may use a few words that we don't use anymore, but my story is an old story. A couple decades ago, because of my bad attitude and my addictions, I could not find work. No work, no money, no place to stay. I was a broken man. I felt useless, hopeless, and full of self-pity. I decided to commit a very selfish act. I wrote a note out for the rent collector saying, I'm leaving, my possessions are yours, left my keys. Went out. As I say, it's a selfish act. I have family. I have friends. And when you have those, you can't just disappear. Word spread through the grapevine. If you see Dave, give him this message. Finally, I did. I met one of my old Narcon buddies, and he said, I got a message coming from your mother. She says, you got to get down to the Friendship Center and talk to the long-term care worker. I told her you'll be coming. You better do it. And no matter how old I get, if my mother says, I better do it, you know I better do it. So I got myself, I went down to see her. She already knew me. She told me there is housing available for you. And there's multiple housing available here. But I think this one is the best for you. She gave me an address and the name of an intake worker. She said, I've already filled out your paperwork. I'll just fax it on to her, let her know you're coming. So I went. The place was they were trying something new. Excuse me for a moment. They were going to use traditional values. This wasn't just going to be a space to live in. We were going to use traditional values and try to build a community, because when you come from the street, you're an outsider. You prefer to be alone. At least I did. And anyway, so when I came in, there are now 25 units in the building. When I come in, only about 11 were occupied. But the way they did it, when you come in, there'd be a tenant meeting, you would be introduced, and if you felt like it, you could tell your story, how you came to be there. Non-judgmental. Traditional values that we used. Meetings where we sat in a circle. We smudged. We gave thanks before we began to talk. And other things, when you get people together, occasionally there's going to be conflict. Those that were in conflict stayed in that room and they passed the talking stick so they could come to a resolution. And little by little, we became to know each other. We became friends. We became a family in that building and would do things together. Like, we had every service provided for me. As I say, addicted. Go here, go there. Doctors, health. They would take you. You know, you had an appointment, they'd take you to the appointment. Shopping trips, field trips. Go to the movies together. This was good, and it grew and it grew, and it was succeeding. It was succeeding so much that the housing agency decided to open another place for men, just for the younger men. Okay, with that, some of the staff would have to move on, our caregivers. and other people would come in. Sometimes they'd stay, sometimes it didn't work out. But gradually, you'd get people coming in, it was a job, just a job. They'd go home at 4:30. So some of the values that the place had been built on gradually got lost. And the evidence was my first exposure. There was a meeting, a field trip I didn't go on. I had other things to do. So a couple days later, I'm sitting outside with one of my friends, and I asked him, "Did you go? How was it?" He said, "It wasn't offered to me. It wasn't offered to me." And I started hearing other stories about things not, some of us would get things, and other people wouldn't be offered it. And this started to build up, and conflict. They like you better than me, that kind of stuff. And it built up, and the stories seemed to get worse. To the point where I actually heard about something that I thought was illegal.
So, Jack.
Able to, oh, it's me?
Yes, it's you.
Oh, thank you. Do I really need this?
Hold it right up to your mouth.
You can hear me now? Oh, good Lord. Wow. Okay, anyways. My name is Deb, or Deborah, or EU. I've been, I'm trying to remember everything now, was listening to Dave. I'm a mother of 2. I'm a grandmother of 3. I'm a sister, and I'm a community member. I've been living at the building for 14 years. It'll be 14 this January the 4th. I came to know the building because I was homeless, and I was living at a friend's place on their couch, which was very nice. But there was 5 people, and me being sick, the 6th person, it was a little crowded. But at least I could stay there for a while, and then I would have to move out. Luckily enough, I got a phone call in regards to the building, and they said they wanted me to come out and see the building, and I said, fine. So I did. I went out and seen the building. I was living in St. Catharines. I had to travel to Hamilton. I then saw the building and went inside and saw my supposed apartment. It was big, and I thought, that's great. It's a big bachelor. There's 24 rooms in that building. They're all bachelors. And so I thought, this is great. Went back to St. Catharines, never heard anything for about 6 months. Then they asked me to come in for another interview into their head office. Went there, talked to an hour to someone, which was fine. Then I went back to St. Catharines again and waited another 3 to 4 weeks. Then they said, would you like to come in for another interview? I thought, okay, fine. I went in for another interview. This time I had to hand in my status card so they could copy it. And they asked me what I was going to bring to the building. And I said, well, I've been a member of the Niagara Regional Native Center for about 12 years. I was on the board for 1 year. I do a lot of volunteer work. And within Hamilton, I'll get to know the place and I'll volunteer there. And I'll volunteer in the building. So I didn't come out of I didn't really meet anybody for 2 months. I just wasn't up to it. Scared, because you're meeting new people. You don't know how you're going to, how they're going to react to you and you're going to react to them. So I finally went down, and they were having some sort of meal. And I went in, and they said hi, and this is so-and-so and so-and-so. And I went, oh, great, hi. And I sat there and I ate a meal with them. And it was great. I got to meet people. But then I went back to my room, and I didn't come out again. So I'm great for hiding. Oh, I just dropped my phone. That's great. But anyways, and I finally went outside. We have like a little park next to the building, and that's where everybody would meet. So I went out there at nighttime and talked to everybody, and it was a little bit more comfortable for me. And I started hearing stories about them being there longer than me and how the building was operated. And I said, oh, that's great. They said they've got a van that will take you on appointments and stuff like that. And I said, that's good. But at those days, I was walking, so I could walk everywhere I wanted to go. That lasted a good year and a half, and then the body decides that it's going to go too. So everybody was very helpful in the building when I got sick. People were helping me to get to places. Then I got cancer. They helped me with that. Joan up here was kind enough to give me my needles 5 days a week for about 8 weeks. And that's quite the commitment. So I was really glad of that. And people in the building were great. When my son passed away, they were there. And we smudged and we talked and we helped me get over it, me try to understand it. But then things started falling apart because people were talking about things that were happening where they were having problems with their tenancy. And I would say, well, you need to do this, you need to do that. Don't let them bully you. Don't let them hurt you. If you need to, I'll go with you. But some of them were just scared because they had already lost a tenancy somewhere along the line and they were scared. They weren't going to do anything. When Joan asked me to join this circle, I said, sure, why not? I had already been in the community by that time about 10 years. And I thought, well, may as well. And it's been a great experience. It's been a learning experience. We don't always get along. We certainly have different ideas of how things should be operated, but that's okay. We argue it out and we talk about it and we discuss it, and we're still friends. We have to keep with each other because we don't keep bonding with each other and helping each other. We're never going to get anywhere. We're just going to keep running our round in like circles. So it's really great that we so far kept together. I'd like to have more people. That's, I think, should be our next aim. Thank you very much.
Okay, so it just occurs to me that they're describing this fabulous place, doesn't it? Now I come along. And now I come along. Okay. I'm Joan. I'm from Samson Cree Nation, which is in, can you hear me okay? Okay, in Alberta. In February 2015, I was woken up by my cat. As I was coming to, I was kind of smiling to myself and thinking, I love the smell of a wood stove. And then I sat bolt upright. I wasn't at the family cabin, and the whole room was, yeah, you can see that. The whole room was smoky, and I ran to our back balcony. The adjoining house was fully engulfed. Fire trucks were on the scene. They were telling us to come out. Firemen came and carried us down. I had no chance to get anything, like no shoes, no socks, nothing. And this is how I came to be without housing. It was minus 27 degrees that night, and you can see, if you can see on the on that picture, the icicles that were forming as the water was coming out of the hoses. Yeah, so it was pretty brutal. I had no idea what to do. I didn't know where to go for help. I'd never been on assistance. I did not know what a shelter is, if you can believe it. I had no clue about food banks, and you know, up until that point, I kind of had always just been working. Not very well, but working. In February 2016, a year later, I moved into the building where we all live now. I had been bouncing back and forth between Hamilton shelters and Toronto because of the fact that there's limitations on how much time you can spend in a shelter. So Hamilton would trade me with Toronto for a bit, and then I'd go back and forth and back and forth. The Indigenous shelter in Toronto that I was going back and forth to was nothing short of amazing. It was a shelter that was created by Indigenous people, for Indigenous people, and was staffed by Indigenous people. They understood that putting a roof over the head of someone in crisis was not enough. They provided wraparound care and took care of physical, spiritual, psychological, intellectual. I mean, it's a great place. It was a shelter, but I mean, it was a great place. When I finally moved into my new place, I was so happy. It was light and space and air, lots and tons of windows and high ceilings, and yeah. When I described it to my friends, I'd say it reminds me of a New York loft without having to deal with New York. I was there for maybe 6 months, and a nasty surprise came my way. I bet you guys are thinking something else. No, it was an eviction notice that stated that I had been at market rent since September. I knew nothing about this. It was now November, and it was substantial. For some reason, I had Lyndon's phone number. Maybe I got it from a bathroom or something.
It's possible.
It was, I really don't know where it came from. It was around 8:30 p.m., and I was quite relieved when he picked up the phone. Agencies, anybody here who, they really need to do something about this. Landlord-tenant issues happen at nighttime too. I mean, people need to be able to call someplace and, have someone say, it's gonna be okay. Drives me crazy. Anyway. So Lyndon and I had a conversation, decided to have and we decided that the community needs to have a meeting. We met and we were introduced to one of Lyndon's colleagues, Brendan, who is a housing-specific lawyer for everything we were experiencing. At that meeting, we decided to make it a regular thing. There were other people going through similar things. We decided to make up flyers. We put them from one end of the city to the other, and we ended up with 5 people from our building. So 9,000 flyers. We went door to door, and it became really, really clear to us that people were scared to get involved for fear of repercussions, which was not cool. We had noticed that people that were involved in the tenant circle and their friends were being ostracized. It was kind of like bullying. Like that Easter, hampers were sent to some tenants. I'll go faster. This was especially upsetting for myself and my neighbor. She's a proud woman. I knew she was really hurt. Another tenant was cut off transportation for physiotherapy appointments, stuff like that. Some were being told they couldn't have family members with them, and they really needed to have them. Meanwhile, the arrears situation that Brendan's going to talk to you in a minute, I had been told to go get this one-time, lifetime grant from another agency to cover my arrears. I was not happy with this because I knew that I wasn't in arrears. But I had no real way of proving this, and they were fine with paying it. So okay, it was a challenge against my integrity. It was attacking my dignity. I was not okay with it, and so I set about finding proof. I had no idea about subsidies, who issued them, anything else like that. But I did have a question: how many other people are they doing this to? So I went. We called the city councilors, MPs, you name it, librarians. I remember harassing a librarian. The one thing we learned is that there's always somebody higher up than the person, like you can always go higher up than the person in front of you to complain, until I guess you get to the funders, right? So the bottom line is you really can make a difference. I mean, one voice is one voice, 2 voices are 2, and 3 is a choir. And if you really think something's going on, you must look into it, because I can tell you, the Thursday before Good Friday, I got to call up Brendan and say, told you so.
Yeah,
And he will explain it to you in his video.
good for you, good for you.
I don't want to say that I was skeptical of the claims that Joan and the other tenants were making, but certainly around the issues of the rent subsidy, I understood the high burden of proof that we would face to be able to prove the claims that we were making, because they were incredibly serious. I remember Joan coming in to my office with a ledger that she had received from the city, which showed that the landlord had been double dipping. They'd been charging Joan regular market rent, they'd been collecting a rent subsidy from the city, and that money was vanishing in their accounts and unaccounted for. And it was just like, it was this kind of dream piece of evidence where you realize, like, we're going to be able to run with this, and went a long, long way in being able to advocate for the type of change that the tenants were looking for.
Okay, so how do we go back to the other screen? So what Joan was able to prove by building positive community connections, by building a group of friends, building a new family, creating new relationships, that they were growing stronger. And there had been, oops, so let's go over.
Oh, sorry.
Okay, so what's different about this group is that in particular with the Indigenous tenant circle, they always maintained who we are, our way of life, our way of being, and every time they met, they included ceremony, because as Indigenous people, every time that we do something, there's ceremony. We have protocols that we have to meet, and that's part of what we've been incorporating in today. We have a way that we do things. And so we always understanding know that we have to acknowledge how we gather, how we've done it for thousands of years. And we bring into those circles knowing that it's not just us coming into those circles, that we're also bringing all of our ancestors. Much as our elder had talked about today in her prayer, that when you came into this room, we brought our ancestors, but you also brought your ancestors. So they were incorporating our way of life and our way of being into everything that they do. And I cannot get technology to work today. I just want to go to the next screen.
Oh, God. Okay.
There we go.
There we go.
So what they had to do was they had to create partnerships. That included other tenants, not just the tenants within the building, but we went all over the city. We were posting signs everywhere that we knew that Indigenous people were going to be. Then we started to reach out to other community members who weren't tenants because we knew that there was strength in numbers. And then they reached out to community resources and to community services because they knew that there's power behind some finances. So Brendan and I work with a community legal clinic. And so we had people who could help with all the legal stuff that needed to be happen. But because of the community work that we do as well, we had expansive community relationships. So it was a really good decision for Joan and the Circle to come to us because we brought all of those community partners to the table. What made this so more difficult for that this was an Indigenous circle, besides the fact that they were incorporating our ways of life and our ways of being into all the work that they did. It was challenging when working with Indigenous housing service providers who were not using their own same ways of life and their own same ways of being. And this is one of the most complicated things that happened for the Indigenous tenant circle, is that they employed Indigenous values, ways of life, and way of being. But those same Indigenous housing agencies who were applying for funding, saying that they were going to incorporate those same Indigenous ways of life and being into the work that they were doing in Indigenous housing, they often forgot about what those Indigenous ways of life and being. They often forgot that when we gather in meetings, regardless of what it is that we do ceremony, and they really forgot that when we deal with one of our most respected groups within Indigenous communities, our seniors, our elders, that you listen to their voices and that you act, and that if they call you at 8:30 at night, you answer the phone. And you go and see them, because that's how we learn as Indigenous people. And so it gets complicated sometimes in Indigenous agencies and organizations when they employ non-Indigenous people to work in those spaces because they don't have that Indigenous way of life and that Indigenous way of being. They don't employ those same protocols and those same kind of systems that we have as Indigenous people. So the mainstream influence gets really heavy. And so every time that the Indigenous tenant circle started to do work, they did it in a good way. It came with a good and open mind, a good and open heart, but they weren't being met with the same kind of reciprocation in our ways of life and our way of being. And that's when the community legal clinic would step in then. And that we would have to put power behind the community legal clinic in everything that went forward to help them understand that there's a way that we do things. And it really was It really was, and that's what we provided. We provided the resources, we provided the space. When we'd come together, there'd be ceremony, there'd be food, because that's what we do as Indigenous people. We acknowledge each other and we talk about things. I watched and witnessed so many crazy things with this Indigenous group. As you can tell, we've obviously grown very close together, that Joan found my number on a bathroom wall. But we can joke like that, because that's what we do as Indigenous people. Back home in my community, we had always learned that never worry about when Indigenous people tease you, worry when they stop teasing you, because that's the problem, and that's a reality, because that's how we show we care about people and how we're connecting and we're building this relationship. It's so extremely important. And so walking down this journey really opened up, and witnessing the stories of Joan and Dave and Deb and everybody else who was coming to that circle was really influential for us in a way that we did things as well, because we were starting to notice even bigger gaps for Indigenous people and other marginalized groups when it comes to housing and homelessness. I don't like to say homelessness, and I don't like to say homeless, because all of the relatives, when I say relatives, I'm talking about Indigenous people, period. There's no biological connection. All of the relatives that I've talked with who don't have a roof over their head felt even more marginalized when we talk to them about being homeless or homelessness. It makes them feel less valued. So I try not to use that term. And I also try not to use that term because over the last couple of days, what we've heard in our languages, Indigenous languages, I'm Anishinaabe, from the Anishinaabe Nation, we don't have a word for goodbye. The closest that we have is until we meet again. We also don't have a word for homeless or homelessness, because we had our own systems. We had our governance systems, and in our governance systems, we had clan systems. And in those clan systems, clans were responsible for housing, so nobody ever was left without housing. And so a lot of the homelessness that we're seeing here in Canada has to do with the direct result of the deconstruction of Indigenous values and Indigenous constructs. I was at, and a really good point to that is a couple years ago, I was asked to speak at I'm going to really kick this thing.
It's not a.
It doesn't want to. I was asked to speak at an International Rainbow Conference, and so I went and opened up and talked about Indigenous queerness, Two-Spirit people, and our roles within Indigenous reality and construct. I went through that whole week going around listening to all these different workshops and all the confusion and all this kind of stuff. And at the end of the conference, what I had come to understand is that, first, in Indigenous ways of life and Indigenous ways of knowing, in most of our communities, we acknowledge anywhere from 13 to 17 different genders. So my closing remarks at the end of that conference were, had you listened to us first, we wouldn't be having these conferences, right? And there's so much that we have built into our ways of life, our way of being, that other communities can learn from. One of the most valuable things that we had learned as a colonial constructed community legal clinic is the value of precedents. And in this particular case, we had learned about how we could apply Gladue reports. For anybody who doesn't know what a Gladue report is, Gladue report helps colonial legal systems better understand the relationship of the Indigenous person who is in front of the court or in front of the adjudicators, a tenant, landlord, board, etc., and their relationship with Canada and the harm done by Canada and Canada's constructs. So Gladue reports, until our clinic introduced them, were limited to only criminal activity. But we saw a need in other areas of law, and we knew that if we were to construct something similar to a Gladue report, we called it a Gladue brief. It's the same thing as a report, but it explained the relationship between Indigenous people and the colonial legal system and the tribunals. And we've been very successful at that. Because Indigenous people are faced with higher rates of racism and discrimination and everything across the board, and housing is included. So I would really, really strongly advocate that first, listen to the voices of those with the lived experience, because we can learn. I have learned so much from these wonderful human beings and everybody else who was engaged in that circle, things that I had never thought about before. I've learned from them. So they've provided me with more teaching than I had ever learned in school and how I move forward. And the other thing is take a serious look at how you can introduce and engage in community partnerships with Indigenous entities, agencies, organizations, communities in the areas that you work. And do what you can to introduce Gladue briefs. If you can't do it physically, you can always introduce them verbally. Find out what the Gladue factors are and start doing that good work. Thank you very much for taking the time to listen and witness to the stories that my dear friends have shared here today. I know that I appreciate it, and I'm sure that they certainly appreciate it as well. Chimagwach Bama Piguaman. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Elder Patsy, for sharing a really beautiful prayer. And thank you to everyone who shared some really powerful stories today. I know that there's going to be a lot of folks who want to share their own insights and have some questions or just have some feedback, which we'll do afterwards. But first, I wanted to introduce Tobin and Cheryl and Melissa to talk about promising practices. Let me get your presentation open. Or did you want to sit here? Is it this one? Okay, thanks. Perfect.
Unfortunately, that's not it. I downloaded it and put it on the thing.
Oh, this one.
Can I just?
Yeah.
I saved it on the desktop.
Okay.
Right there? No.
Okay, great. Hello, I am the bonus presenter on this presentation. Whoa! My name is Laura Pinn. I am grateful to be here on Mi'kma'ki territory of the Mi'kmaq people. I'm an assistant professor at Wilfrid Laurier University in Waterloo, Ontario. I'm going to ask my colleagues to introduce themselves as well.
Hi, everyone. I'm Melissa Giles. I use pronouns she, her, and hers, and I am the managing director of BC Rent Bank at Van City Community Foundation.
Not sure how I follow that. Hi, my name is Cheryl Krostowitz. I'm the Director of Programs at the Manitoba Nonprofit Housing Association.
Hi, I'm Tobin LeBlanc-Haley. I'm an academic, don't hold it against me, at the University of New Brunswick, and I'm a white settler. My father's family is from Unama'ki, and we're settlers there, and I live and work in the unceded territory of the Wolastoqey in St. John, New Brunswick.
Yes! Woo! Okay. Thank you. We have some colleagues who are not here. Christy Allen from St. Thomas University, Melissa Jeffries from the London Housing Stability Bank, as well as Gladys Wong from the Toronto Rent Bank. So our presentation today, Rent Banks in Canada, Promising Practices for Homelessness Prevention, is a research partnership between the university researchers as well as the Canadian Rent Bank Coalition, a coalition of rent banks and folks who are interested in rent banks, working to share information and best practices. And it's a study of 4 rent banks, 2 provincial, so Manitoba and British Columbia, and 2 that operate at the municipal level, so London and Toronto. In terms of what we're going to do today, we're going to briefly cover what is a rent bank and the history of rent banks in Canada, talk a little bit about the formation of the Canadian Rent Bank Coalition, some of the benefits and limitations of rent banks, so what they're really useful at addressing, and then some of the structural things that kind of go beyond the scope of rent banks, as well as some implementation choices and implications, and we'll close with a little bit about our ongoing work. And so I'll invite Melissa to come take over.
Take over sounds so aggressive. Lovely to be here, and it's really hard to finish or follow up after the last panel. So thank you for sharing stories with us. Really appreciate that. So rent banks, I'm representing a coalition, so I'll try to stick to the core of what we do, representing or recognizing that different provinces and municipalities administer this program, slightly different from each other. But what holds us together as rent banks is that we're focused on eviction prevention and housing stability within our work. And there's two key areas that we do this. One of that is providing financial assistance. So you'll hear us talk today about loans and grants and these types of things. So we want to help renters at that time of crisis, ensuring that they stay housed or they can access housing. The second way that rent banks support renters is through what we call supplementary or secondary supports. It's this idea of, renters need so much more than that financial assistance. So can we connect them to a community referral, a food bank? Can we help them advocate? Can we help them mediate with their landlord? What are their tenant rights? Are they aware of that? Debt consolidation is a reality for a lot of renters right now. They've been put in very difficult positions and they had no choice, so they went to places like credit card debt or those high interest lending institutions. Payday loans and Money Mart. We want them out of business. So that is the focus of our work, and we're there to support renters in those two ways. We're different than a program where somebody needs that ongoing month-to-month financial support, right? There are programs out there. This is meant to be working with somebody on a case-by-case basis. Real-life examples. I had a tooth problem. I had to decide, do I go to the dentist or do I pay my rent? My car broke down, I need it for work. Do I fix it or not fix it? Single parents without proper benefits. My child was sick, I had to miss work, I don't have enough money this month. I'm waiting for income assistance, EI, PWD, all of these things. This can be bridge funding to help people during that time. BC, and I'm sure representative of Canada, has ridiculously increasing rental market rates. And if people lose that housing, they can't get back into housing. So we need to focus on that. So rent banks in Canada, Toronto, I think, is some of the earlier models in the 90s. We see this spring up. And then municipalities throughout Ontario. There's a rent bank in Hamilton and London. Rent banks in BC start around 2010. There's 7 rent banks by the time we're about 2019. That's when we got involved at BC Rent Bank in supporting the growth of that. We have 18 rent banks now in British Columbia, full provincial coverage. Every renter can access that service. And my colleague here from Manitoba, their work started in 2021 after provincial support. And a shout out to the New Brunswick government. June of this year, they announced that they'll get going on a rent bank program. We want to support them in getting that work up and running. So we see rent banks kind of growing, and you hear this reference to who we are and what we're here to talk about, which is the Canadian Rent Bank Coalition. This is a very organic grassroots thing. The name, everything, we're coming together as rent banks, recognizing that we can be there to support each other. We can share information. We can learn about best practices. I mean, I'm on calls with Cheryl and I'm like, how do you handle this one thing? I don't know how to do it. She's like, we talk about these things together. The idea is we can grow this network of support across Canada, and we can learn and grow from each other so that we can have stronger rent supports, and that ultimately renters are benefiting from these programs. So that's a little bit about what I wanted to cover today, and I'm going to hand it over to Cheryl to talk a little bit more about the program and about the Manitoba model.
I was really hoping I wouldn't have to follow Melissa because she's much taller than me. So please let me know if my volume is okay and you can hear me in the back. We're okay? I'm seeing some thumbs up. Awesome. Rent banks. Manitoba is kind of the baby of rent banks. We've been at it for about 2.5 years. And I really want to give thanks to our colleagues across Canada who taught us so much about rent banks. It's a really, as we talked about it being very grassroots, the coalition, it was really because all of us were learning from each other, and we continue to support provinces like the government of New Brunswick, where they're looking at creating and implementing and how do they do it. So rent banks are an amazing thing. And so when we talk about some of the benefits, I think I need to go back a little bit and say that I work at Manitoba Nonprofit Housing Association. So we are a member-based organization of nonprofit housing providers, as well as a lot of different service organizations who provide housing supports to people. So way back in 2021, there was this crazy thing going on. I think it was called COVID. Some of you might remember it. I don't know. I remember it vividly. Anyways, at that time, our province came to us because they were looking for somebody to deliver provincial funding to help people who were at risk of losing their housing due to a temporary interruption in earnings. Now, I'm not supposed to say that, but there's nobody here from the province of Manitoba, so I'm going to say it. The reason why is because although that was the original intention of it, we found out really quickly that COVID was a very small part of the reason why people were facing housing instability. There's so many other things going on. So it really was the impetus of getting our rent bank going in Manitoba. But in reality, like I say, there's so many other root causes to housing instability. So COVID became a really small part of it. So we're kind of trying to get away from that message that it was COVID and emergency related because it's housing instability related. So some of the benefits are, as I said, it can provide housing stability, mostly within a situation where a person is temporarily unable to pay the rent. And as was said before, I've seen all kinds of reasons why people could not pay the rent. People are making decisions 1 month, do I pay my utilities or do I pay my rent? Do I use the food banks or can I go grocery shopping? They're making these kind of decisions, and it's tough out there. With inflation the way it is right now, it's not getting any easier for people. So the use of the rent bank is huge. We see I would say about 3,000 applications a year. So that's a lot of people who are in crisis. Some of the benefits include as well resource management. I remember having a conversation with a friend of mine who said he needed to get his mother into lower income subsidized housing. And he said, how do I do that? And I'm like, well, you can go here and you can apply here. And then there's this portable benefit. Oh, and don't forget to send her over here. But you'll need to get your option C from CRA first before you do that. And after 20 minutes of this, I said, how does anybody navigate the system? So what we do as rent banks is we really provide a venue to do a deep dive with people. We do a little bit of a budgeting exercise with them. As well, we find out what really brought them to here. What's the root cause? What was the life shock? And we need to focus on stabilizing that because the loan is not always the best for people because if they're going to be if they're going to be in the same situation in the next month after we pay their arrears, we're not helping them. We're not bailing them out at all. So we really focus on housing stability. We've been able to help participants access financial support programs that they weren't aware of before. I've had participants who, by the time they left our program, and I say left because I feel like they never do, lots of them check in with us and tell them happy stories, and other people check in and say, I still need more help. But in reality, people struggle. And so it's nice to have that check-in. And so we've had participants who, they end up, after having portable benefits, getting $700 to $900 extra in their budget to work with. It was programs that they were able to access the whole time, but they didn't know about it. The promotion is very, very poor. And so often what happens is we will connect them, we will help them complete the forms, the applications, and I think all the rent banks across Canada, despite our differences in how we operate, they all tend to do the same thing, and that is to stabilize housing. I think one of the other big benefits, too, is the fact that we can use the data that we get from people, and Michelle did a great job of talking about capturing data in real time, and that's what we really do, and the purpose of that is really so that we can do gap analysis, we can advocate. We spent 11 months working on a database. It's been crazy. It's been launched for like 2 weeks, so we're still kind of ironing out bugs. But one of the important things that database is meant to do is record data for us so that we can advocate. We can show the province that some of the major reasons for housing insecurity is lack of affordable housing. So what is the percentage of people who are paying more than 30% of their income? We can also talk about the benefits of working together as organizations. I'm a little scared now with the technology because you scared me a little bit over there. And I'm not the most technologically savvy person. But some of the data that we've collected is really important in terms of how many of the participants at the 3-month and a 6-month mark are still stably housed. Do they feel like the resources that we provided them helped them? Are they in a better financial position? So we do a 3-month survey that goes out to both participants and landlords and gathers information about their experience. The 3-month survey is really meant to gauge how we're doing as an organization. So how was your experience with our staff? Did you feel supported throughout? Did you feel judged? We had the conversation earlier about, people being afraid to talk to their landlords about things because they're in affordable housing, they don't want to lose their home. So one of the things that we do as well is we advocate with landlords. We know the system. So you'll have somebody and they'll say, my landlord slipped a note under my door and I'm evicted tomorrow. No, you're not. There's a process here. We're going to work with you. We will even attend residential tenancies branch hearings with a participant if they're feeling that they need some kind of support. Often the whole process scares them, and so it's good to be able to have a voice with them who can support them and work through the system. At the 6-month mark, and this is 6 months after they receive a loan from us. And so all loans are provided directly to the landlord or the utility provider. In Manitoba, our eligibility is $2,500 maximum loan or the equivalent of 2 months' rent. That's repayable over 2 years. So at the 6-month mark, our wonderful staff reaches out to their participants and they do a brief verbal survey so that they can kind of dive deeper into where they are in their life, whether this really did support them. So I think we have some really impressive statistics here. I may be a little bit biased, but I think they're pretty impressive. So of the people who were surveyed, did receiving the rent relief loan stabilize your housing? 92% of people said yes. 4% said no, and 4% were unsure. So we will see some of these unsures here, and I'm not quite sure what that is. But a 92% success rate, I think, is pretty good. Did the resources improve the financial stability? 77% of people said yes. 9% said no, and 14% were unsure. Of the no's and the unsures, I would bet that a significant portion of those people did not take advantage of the resources, and that's why they answered that way. Did the resources improve your personal well-being? So 71% said yes, 10% no, and 19% were unsure. We also do a landlord survey at the 3-month mark. So anybody who receives a check gets a follow-up survey from us. We ask them, do the loans help tenants stabilize their housing? So after they received the loan, were they stabilized? 44% agreed that it did. 38% strongly agreed. 13% disagreed, and 6% didn't have an opinion. So that too is a pretty good success rate. And of the landlords, we asked them the question, would they recommend the program to other landlords? 56% agreed, 44% strongly agreed. So it's a program that's benefiting not just the tenants, but also the landlords who are getting their rent arrears. Loans helped my tenants avoid eviction. So 44% agreed, 44% strongly agreed. That's an 88% of people who whose tenancy was stabilized. Oops. Sorry, I think I went. Okay, great. So some of the limitations of the program is in Manitoba, it's 100% loans. So that does create a problem because they have to demonstrate ability to pay. Now, having said that, our province has been very generous in terms of collection rates. So we do our best to work with participants to ensure that they can pay back the loan, but really the biggest part of it is the housing stability part. So if a person has stable housing, that's always the main factor. And the first thing that we did when we were looking at developing this program was a set of guiding principles. And to this day, those guiding principles guide every single decision that we make on loans. We did some strategic planning a couple of months ago with our staff. We looked at the guiding principles, which were from day one. We said, what do you think? Do we need to change this? They said, no, perfect the way it was. So 2.5 years later, those guiding principles are still important to our staff. Another limitation is, of course, the uncertainty of utility costs. So rent is what it is. Utilities can vary. So that's, a barrier for some people as well. And I think one of the biggest challenges is the fact that we need a better system. We need more affordable housing. People are paying 60 to 70% of their household income towards rent, which is not sustainable. But where are they going to go? There's just not enough affordable housing. The other barrier can sometimes be service navigation. So trying to jump through some of those hoops. And EIA, which is our provincial social assistance, EIA wait times. So 6 to 8 weeks in Manitoba just to get an intake appointment, during which time a participant has no money whatsoever. And so we have a lot of people coming to us for loans, and we know we're probably not going to get it back because on a basic needs budget, who can pay back a loan on top of that, right? So those are systemic barriers that we deal with. And I think I'm going to wrap it up there. But I would like to encourage anybody who is thinking about starting a rent bank to reach out to the Coalition for information. They've helped us so much here in Manitoba, and now we want to give back. So thank you all.
So we don't have to, everyone can hear me. I'm super loud, right? Yeah? Uh-huh. No one wants this. Okay, so one of the pieces, and if you could just jump ahead, thank you, to the last slide of this, is that we are, Laura and I are academics, and our colleague Christy, along with the partners at the Canadian Rent Bank Coalition, are just wrapping up the first national study on rent banks in Canada. And what we're looking at is how, because rent banks, of course, have it's a very useful umbrella category, but there's all kinds of different ways, as you've heard, to organize and operate rent banks. And so we're doing a nationwide study on how that works and what the implications are of different kinds of decision-making around grants, loans, repayable loans. But obviously, all of these loans are interest-free. I just feel like this is really important to say. And no one's grabbing SIN numbers and sending collection agents out into the community. That's not what this is about. So follow along on the Canadian Rent Bank Coalition website, and you'll be able to see the findings from our study at that time.
Thank you, everyone, for staying right up till 5 o'clock. I know that a lot of you have to go, but if some of you do have questions, maybe we'll take like 2 or 3 tops for those of you who are able to. Yeah. Oh, here, Joanne.
I get, personally, I would love to support it. Of course, my work is focused in British Columbia. So whatever we can do, if there's people we should talk to, or there's politicians, those of power, or those that have finances to make this happen, you can put them in touch with any one of us, and we'd be happy to support the growth of that program.
Thank you. Do you have discretion on how much you can issue? Like, is it a certain amount for a single, a certain amount for a single parent and kid? Like, does it range, or do you have discretion? Like, for example, in Peterborough, I'm seeing $10,000 arrears on ways and utilities, like, and 5, 7, 8, 10, 15, and we have to address it. So do you guys have caps, or how do you make that work?
I'll speak and then hand it to my colleague. The question was, do you have caps on what you're allowed to rent or loan out to people? Yes, we do. In British Columbia, we say up to $3,500. It's not dependent on single or family or anything like that. And it's a balance of the capacity of the person to repay. And we aren't like financial institutions, so we can't loan $10,000, $20,000 worth of money. So it's meant to be a microloan to support people. Our model in BC is that we work with local nonprofit organizations to deliver it, and their allowable amount should reflect the local rental market. Right? So Cranbrook is not going to be the same as renting in Victoria or Vancouver as Fort St. John. So they make that determination based on the rental market.
Yeah, so in Manitoba, our maximum allowable is $2,500, or the equivalent of 2 months' rent, whichever is less. However, we do have discretion. So our province has allowed us, and don't be telling participants this, please. But our province has allowed us the discretion to make decisions to loan out more if in our discretion it's something that we feel is important. So we have provided loans for over $2,500 if we know they're going to be in a good housing situation going forward. Maybe now they can get rent geared to income. Sometimes a person has to pay off their arrears before they can be moved into a subsidized unit. So in that case, it's a really good idea to give them what they need so that they can go forward.
Just want to acknowledge that there were other panelists here with us or other presentations. So we're occupying space, which is probably wrong, but let us know.
If you have questions for some of the other members, I can hop around with the microphone and bring it over to you. There's a microphone right there, so if you have a question, you feel free to stand in. There's not?
So, it's rent bank, so it's like a good idea, it's real great. But as we all know, the rent banks are helping a symptom, they're not like actually helping to eliminate the problem. So as much as I appreciate what y'all do, I was just wondering, are there actions you take as rent bank operators to be like, this is great, but how about you make it so we don't need to do this anymore? Because what we need to do is get the financialization out of the goddamn housing market. So,
I'd love to take that one. So I'm going to give you an example. So we provide a quarterly report to the province of Manitoba, and it is very detailed in not only successes, but challenges. And many of those are system-related challenges. And we use our reports so that we can actually advocate for change. So I'll give you an example. We have been struggling with higher utility rates and EIA not paying enough for people who are in housing. And yeah, so we recognize that's been a big problem for our participants. So the senior policy analyst who receives our data said she was pushing our report up the chain and asked if there was a desire for us to work with them on maybe finding a solution for that. So when I talked about data collection, that's the really important part, right? Because we learn from our participants what their challenges are to be stably housed. So absolutely, it is a short-term solution. It is not meant to fix the holes. It's a Band-Aid solution, but it's a darn good start.
So, yeah, I really appreciate that question, and yeah, no one thinks that lending people a little bit of money short term is going to fix the broader housing issue. But a lot of us are also housing activists outside of this work, so this is like part of part of our work. So a lot of us do like more direct action housing work as well.
Does anyone have like one more question for maybe one of the other presenters?
I just wanted to actually say for our Indigenous tenant circle concept, and then just the session I attended prior, we had people speaking from the Northwest Territories, and they echoed that. And you know, there's a lot of upset in the planet, and so sometimes I tap into spiritual from all different cultures and sources, including people that talk to aliens and channel and talk to angels and spirits and so on. But they all keep saying we really should return to the ancient governance that is unified with this planet. We are one race, one planet, no planet B. And then when I hear that they've said, it echoes that as well, that we are in this together, and that needs to be the light, is the unity together, and not have this fear-based and profiteering, fearing. It's wrong, and there's so much more to unite, and I wish that governance, we had never lost those ancient ways of that unifying way.
Thank you so much, everyone, for staying super late.